Welcome to the Project Endure podcast, the place where we talk about life, endurance, persistence, perspective, and so much more. I'm Joe Rinaldi, and I'll be your host. Let's jump in. Welcome back to the Project Endure podcast. It is episode 11. We have myself, Joe Rinaldi, and we have a very special guest out in Utah, Danny Jimenez. Danny, did I get it right this time?
Nailed it.
Cool, man. Well, you and I know each other through social media. You've been on my other podcast. We've had many conversations offline, and you are kind of the perfect person for this kind of conversation. And I don't want to introduce you, and I don't want to take away from our conversation before it happens. So let me just throw the ball in your court, and why don't you just introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, sounds good. So my name's Danny Jimenez, 23 years old, married out here in Utah, moved here about 3 years ago. Previously, I grew up in Reno, Nevada. But yeah, pretty normal upbringing, lots of sports in high school, went on a 2-year church service mission to Africa, came back, had a little bit of a identity crisis, I guess, had to really figure out who I wanted to be, who I was. And then from there, really found my identity in challenging myself mentally, physically. So specifically endurance sports, running, triathlon, and just any sort of challenge somebody can come up with. So yeah, that's a quick intro.
I love it, man. And tell us a little bit about the shirt you're wearing. I know what it is, but for everybody who can't see, you've got a big G and C on your chest. What does that stand for?
Yeah, so I believe this was introduced in the last podcast episode that we did, but I started my own brand called Go Crazy. I found out that when you pursue something obsessively and you find a passion and you start going down that road, a lot of people are going to question you, call you crazy, and maybe even get a little personal. So I decided to spin that for a positive, make a brand out of it, and encourage people to be crazy, seek out that discomfort, seek out, I guess, I don't know, a difference of opinions, but then go and pursue that as hard as you can.
Yeah, and I absolutely love it. And when you were on the other podcast, the Pursuit podcast, I threw this quote out there, but I'm going to say it again for this audience. It's by Friedrich Nietzsche. I think I said that right. And he said, "And those who dance are considered insane by those who can't hear the music." And when I think of Go Crazy, I think of it in such a positive light, because people who might call you crazy or call me crazy for reasons that, we'll get to in this podcast. Those people are living, a life that I don't necessarily want to live. I don't want to work a 9-to-5 desk job. I don't want to be a little bit overweight. I don't want to be, unhappy, X, Y, and Z. So I think normal is overrated and crazy is underrated, and everybody's got their own crazy. And speaking of crazy, I think you should probably kick this off by telling us about what you just did in the Grand Canyon, because that is crazy.
Yeah, so most recent project, luckily I've been able to make a lot of friends in this world that are much better athletes, much more experienced than I am. But that plays to my advantage because I have to, play catch up, and they just drag me along on these things. So they invited me to do rim to rim to rim, which is in the Grand Canyon. You can do it a couple different ways. You can go south, north, south. There's Bright Angel or something like that. We just did north, south, north. And they say that that's the harder route because the north side is steeper. So to finish it off with that climb, it definitely is a character builder. But total, the mileage gets a little bit skewed with the GPS signal in the Grand Canyon, but I ended up calculating 43 miles, 11,000 feet of elevation gain. I think it was like 11.4 or something like that. And you want to talk about crazy. It was hilarious passing people going up and then watching their faces as we were coming back down, so confused, like, wait a second, I swear I just saw you. Why are you going back? So yeah, it was fun telling people what we were doing out there. But, from a personal standpoint and the whole belief behind doing some of these things, it was an opportunity I love proving myself and others, but mostly myself, wrong. right? When you hear something like that, 43 miles, like, nah, no way. But it's fun to go in with that mentality of like, I may not survive, and then just go out and crush it, because it just teaches you over and over again that those initial thoughts, you don't have to listen to them. You're the dictator, right? So you can decide what you want to do and what's possible.
Let's talk more about that. So, I'm kind of going off script here, and we'll get to the questions, but I think that concept of that internal negotiation that we all have, not even just with a crazy endurance event, but in everyday life, whether it's getting up or going to the gym or doing what you're supposed to do, that voice exists. That voice that's telling us that you can take the easy way out, or you can stop here, or this is good enough. And so for you, Danny, how have you been able to tap into that other person that can drown out that voice that's telling you that you've done good enough, you've done enough, that you can just stop?
Yeah, slowly and through repetition. It's definitely not all at once that you can just defeat that voice over and over. It's mostly just small things. I don't want to get up right now. I don't want to get out of bed. I don't want to go to the gym today. I don't want to put 100% into the work that's on my desk right now. Those small little things, eventually you realize, wow, that other voice doesn't matter. And there's this quote, I actually think I heard it in church or something, but it's funny how it's applicable here. But it's, you can't stop a bird from landing on your head, but you can stop it from creating a nest,
Mm.
right? So you can't really stop some of those thoughts. Naturally, your first thought when you wake up in the morning is, it's dark outside, especially during the winter, right? It's dark, it's cold. Who wants to get up right now? Um, and for somebody like yourself, all we see on social media is like this crazy blocked off schedule, you getting up and crushing it. And we don't get to experience like those other thoughts, but I'm sure that they exist, right? So everybody has those, but you can stop and realize that those don't have to stay there and those don't have any control. So it's definitely the repetition. You don't start out deciding like, oh, I can defeat this thought and run the Grand Canyon. You start out with defeating the workout that you have of the day, right? Or even smaller stuff like that, washing the dishes, taking out the trash. Nobody wants to do that stuff, right? But when you do it, when you don't want to, that's where the victory comes in.
Absolutely. And I personally see so much value in doing hard things intentionally on a daily basis to build up that mental muscle, to build up that willpower. And that comes into play one day when we face something in life that we can't control. And it's really a privilege to be able to choose our hard. And that's exactly what you're talking about with the Grand Canyon endeavor and with all of those other things that we all do on a daily basis. We get to choose those things. But my question for you, Danny, to kick this off is, what is the hardest thing that life has handed you, that a circumstance, a situation, or something that you haven't had any say in? What is the hardest thing that's ever happened to you?
Yeah. Um, I'll be honest, I've had it pretty easy. My parents were the ones that moved from Mexico here, established our family. They did a lot of the hard stuff for me. Um, I was just able to kind of play sports, take it easy, just do my thing for most of my life. And even going into that church service mission that I had mentioned, I really felt like I had an identity and I knew what I was supposed to do. It wasn't until I came back that I had this stint of about 3 or 4 months for the first time in my life where I didn't have that identity. So I've been fortunate enough that it hasn't been anything like, an IED going off somewhere and like being paralyzed, big things that people have to deal with. But this is what I've had to go through, and so hopefully in sharing it, it speaks to somebody. But basically, coming back from my church service mission, before that, I had decided that I was going to pursue college football. And when I came back, I decided that was no longer in the cards. I wanted to live here in Utah, be close to family, and come to school. But I realized that I had tied a lot of my identity and my value to sports and being recognized, having my name out there, that kind of thing. So for the first time, I was a nobody in a small school. Well, actually, a really ginormous school, but I just felt like, such a small space around myself. So yeah, I just had to really figure out, okay, who am I outside of sports? Who am I outside of recognition? And eventually it got to the point where I had such a lack of identity that I had gotten together with my mom and we decided to find a life coach in the area, right? And I think a lot of people are pursuing that at this time. I think the pandemic has caused a lot of self-reflection, isolation, and seeking out those coaches. So this isn't necessarily a plug for life coaches. It's more just what I don't know, what I saw as the solution. So I went and I spoke with him, and it was actually really funny. It only took about 3 sessions for us to have our big breakthrough. But basically, what we had realized was I had shielded and protected myself so much from failure that I was just completely paralyzed from action, basically. So there were a few key things that we identified. There was a time that I told them about in high school where I showed up to freshman basketball tryouts, took a look at the talent that was there, walked right out the door, didn't even try out, never showed up again, right? And so I was really only doing things that I was good at. And this identity crisis that I had was the fact that there was nothing that I was good at. There was no recognition that I was getting, or at least I didn't feel like it. And so from there, I really had to rebuild my identity and get real comfortable with failure, being a nothing, being a nobody, but finding my value in I'm me, right? And all I can do is me. And what can I do, right? Okay, I've got an athletic background. I can run, I can get into these things, I can make an impact. And for a lot of people, it's like, why would you run 40 miles? It's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Like, what's the point of that? For one, yes, preparing yourself to do hard things, building mental toughness. But at the end of the day, that's what I can do. Okay, I wasn't blessed with the ability to draw. I wasn't blessed with the ability to be a, I don't know, a rocket scientist or something like that. I'm just trying to do what I can do and inspire through that avenue. So very long answer to your question, but that's kind of the hardest thing that I had to go through that really helped build my identity.
There are so many good things in there. And I think, to start with the life coach, yeah, it's become really popular these days. And some of what I do might fall into the category of life coaching. I call it mindset coaching, but, take it for what it is. I see so much value in having outside perspective. And so I think when people are struggling with something mentally, there's this stigma that I think is getting better, but there's a stigma that still exists that, there's a shame associated with going to get help, which is absolutely crazy because if you hurt your body, you go get help for it. If your car breaks down, you go get help for it. If you need help with homework, you go get a tutor, right? But when it comes to our mental health, our identity, right, there's a stigma still. So I think what you said is really important. And there's a Les Brown quote that sticks out to me. He said, you can't see the picture when you're in the frame. And I think sometimes we're too much in our own frame and we need that outside perspective for help. And then your breakthrough came and you realized that you weren't embracing a growth mindset. And so for anybody listening, there's an awesome book out there. Some might consider it on the dry side, but it's called Mindset by Carol Dweck, and it's one of my all-time favorites. And a growth mindset is essentially a mindset where you don't see failure as part of your identity. You see failure as an opportunity for growth. And the opposite of a growth mindset is a fixed mindset, where you do see failure as tied to your identity. And I think one of the most important defining factors of resilience is when people are secure and confident in who they are and where their worth comes from, and that their worth and their identity is not tied to outside events that are outside of their control. And I think that's such a hard lesson to learn, but it's really clear that you've embraced that. And I think that was just, it's a point I wanted to highlight for anybody listening. It's not easy to get to that place, but it's powerful when you're there. And so, all right, Danny, so you've been through some tough stuff. Hard is relative. That was hard for you. And you continue to push and do hard things. And I realize now I might have already asked you about this question indirectly, but what is the hardest thing that you've ever done on purpose? And why have you done that thing?
The hardest thing I've done on purpose. I mean, that's like what I've been seeking out daily now, in my life. So I think a lot of these things are comparable. I would say it was either between the back-to-back full distance triathlons that I did with James Lawrence or the Grand Canyon. The thing about the Grand Canyon was, yes, it was physically hard. I could not walk the next day, but everything went really well.
Mm.
With the back-to-back triathlons, there was other sports involved. Like I was able to cycle besides running and stuff. But I think a combined 12 flat tires, waking up, 4:30 the next day after completing a full distance triathlon. So there were a lot more variables there. So that one was tough as well.
Yeah, and when you were doing the back-to-back triathlons with James Lawrence, the Iron Cowboy, what was the hardest moment in that stretch of the two back-to-back full distance triathlons?
So hardest moment was day two, mile, let's see, what was, I think it was mile 7 of the bike, 7 of 112. Uh, I had kind of my first mental breakdown, and I was going down this big hill, and I think I just hit a rock directly and popped my tire. So I was separated from the peloton, and I was alone with 105 miles to go, right? So 105 miles, nobody to draft with, nobody to have a conversation with, and it was my second day. So very fatigued, hot spots in some not sensitive areas, some very sensitive areas, to say that lightly. But anyway, so that really began it. But from there, about mile 30, I think I called my wife on the bike, just having a little bit of a mental breakdown. So that moment, I really had to decide. She ended up coming in the car to meet me at a point with the bike, and I hopped in the car, and she said, "I'm only going to ask you this once. Do you want to stop?" And my answer was pretty quick. I just said no, because I knew that that's just not who I was. But I had to have that moment, and it's cool that she knew that she could ask because she was concerned, but she only had to ask me once. And I said no, and the rest of that day, I think we finished at 2:30 in the morning the next day, technically. So it was a long day, but that moment where I had to decide, um, I really had made that decision long before, right? That decision could have been much harder if it was in that moment, but that's just a part of who I decided I was going to be. So that was a pretty easy decision.
That's a cool little anecdote. It's funny that she knew. She just had to ask you once because she was concerned, and then the rest was, up to you. Now, you did those back-to-back full distance triathlons, and you also experienced James do 101 back-to-back to back-to-back to back-to-back full distance triathlons. Was there a learning process that happened there? Were there big takeaways you had from being part of that experience and integrated into his journey there?
An insane learning experience. It was really cool having that much time, not only around him, but just time in doing the activities. There was a lot of moments where you could reflect and think about yourself, see what he was doing, see the community that was gathering around him and what it inspired out of them to dig out of themselves. So I have a full notes page from those 101 days of little things that I wrote down. Nothing great is achieved individually, and different things logistically. So all of those different things, it was a crazy learning experience and really set the tone for coming out. I think that finished June 6th or something like that. Coming out of June 6th, starting Go Crazy, doing the Grand Canyon. From there, it's just been kind of a launching pad.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Nothing great can be achieved alone. And in your life, right, you're married. On the episode right before this one, Adam Klink talks a little bit about the struggles that come with marriage, especially for somebody who's really driven, who's doing a lot, who aspires to do a lot. And for you, I'm wondering, what are some of the challenges that have come up in your relationship with your wife as you've pursued all these, quite frankly, crazy endeavors?
Yeah. Well, one thing that my wife and honestly my entire family can attest to is I'm a horrible communicator. So a lot of the times I'll come up with the ideas, I'll be 6 feet deep into them, right? And I haven't even told them. So it's like, eventually they come home one day and I'm just like, oh, by the way, I'm doing this, this, and this. Another thing is, for a lot of these projects, they're not necessarily sanctioned races. And so I need that support, not only financially, but a lot of the times driving support vehicles, stressing my wife out. When she sees me suffering, obviously there's some care there. So it loads onto her shoulders. So there's a lot of difficulties. Luckily, I don't know. At first, I was like, wow, my wife and I could not be any more different, right? She does not react well to the type of motivation where it's like, oh, I bet you can't do that. That's what I thrive on, right? That's what I just said. I love proving people wrong. She is more of like, I need you to tell me that I can. Not no really interest in endurance sports. She's more like artistic, organizational. Yeah, just lives a little bit more carefree. So at first I was kind of just like, wow, how is it going to be possible? The thing is I feel like I misled her a little bit because when we got married, this was not in my life at all, right? So eventually when I got into this, poor girl, she just got thrust into it as well. And I didn't really ask her for permission. So but anyway, I think the strength though that comes from being complete opposites is that, we don't both have to run, we don't both have to compete, we're not both insanely pursuing these different things. We can just team up. So where I'm more of like that motivated side where I'm driving for this and I want it to benefit our family, now she can hop on board and see that vision of, okay, this is actually contributing to a bigger picture. Where can I help in organizing things, in taking care of my gear, and just holding the fort down, with our dog and our house here while I'm out doing these crazy things. So I could not be more thankful for her. There are definitely those difficulties though of I could not do this by myself. And there are definitely difficulties with my personality where I'm just out doing things and sometimes forget to communicate. So there's a lot to deal with there. But at the end of the day, you can't do it without a team, and it wouldn't be that fun without a team. If all the achievements and everything were just for yourself, it wouldn't be that fulfilling.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with that. And as you continue to be more integrated into the endurance world, let's call it, out in Utah and the surrounding areas, what are some of the big takeaways from the community that you've built, right? So Iron Cowboy, James Lawrence is one person. It sounds like you've connected with so many others. And I'm sure there are so many takeaways from just the community aspect of that world out there. Are there other lessons you've learned or takeaways you've had from all of those relationships?
Yeah, the community has been a game changer for me. You don't really realize how sheltered you are and how limited you think your potential is until you get out there with other people.
Mm.
I unintentionally, honestly, am completely surrounded with people that are much better than I am. Athletically, they're usually a lot older than me, so they're much more advanced in their careers. I'm usually at the back of the pack when it comes to trail running. They're just flying up these hills and I'm at the back. And a lot of the times in my head, I'm thinking, this is not fun. Like I could be with another group, that's a little bit slower pace. I could be leading it. I could be the guy, right? But then I just quickly correct myself. What would be the point of being the guy? Just for myself to get that recognition, right? Or just for myself to get done with that run and be like, yeah, I'm the guy, right? In that group. But then I come to this one and get completely humbled. So it's not always fun being the worst in your group. But when you constantly surround yourself with those people, then eventually you go out and do rim to rim to rim, which can be a lifetime achievement for some people, right? And so I just feel fortunate to be with those groups, and there's always something to learn. Whenever you do a group run and you see these people, okay, hey, that's a cool way to tie your shoes, or that's a cool, gear to use. There's little things like that, but then there's also just the community of, wow, this person did rim to rim to rim 2 days in a row, that kind of thing where you're just like, okay, if I wasn't involved in that group, if I didn't know, my ceiling, my reality would be set here, whereas other people's reality are way up here. And when you expose yourself to those realities, you realize what's possible.
Yeah, it makes me think of Roger Bannister, the first person ever to break the 4 minute mile. And it had never been done. Many people had tried, and then he broke it. And within a few years, multiple other people broke that record. And I don't know what the official world record is at currently, but I'm sure it's well under 4 minutes. And sometimes all it takes for somebody to elevate to the next level or do that next hard thing or endure just a little bit more is to know that somebody else has done it. And I think there's so much value in physically surrounding yourself with people who are also pursuing hard things, because there's just that factor of, okay, there are people around me who whether or not I feel like I need to be accountable, I want to be accountable, because these people are also in the trenches with me right now, giving it their all. They're hurting just as much as I am. And we're in this together. Even though we're running our own races, we're in this together. And I think that's so beautiful. And so as you look forward, Danny, what's the next hard thing on the calendar for you? Is that already mapped out?
Yeah. So it kind of always is, but I've just decided, going along what I said before, the achievements aren't really that fun when they're individual or even just within my close circle. I want to expand that and put a little bit more purpose behind these events, especially if I'm going to go out and suffer as much as I do. I might as well make it a little bit more meaningful. So I've decided to attach a cause to each of the following things that I'm going to do. I'll be able to put a little bit more awareness out there for causes that are near and dear to my heart, along with Go Crazy brand. So the next thing on the calendar is going to be January 29th. I'm going to do the Arches 50K. So out here in Moab, it's going to be about 30 mile race, 31, 32, something like that. And I'm going to be attaching the cause, I guess, awareness for autism. I've got a really close friend and now a family member on my wife's side that is, I guess they're on that spectrum. And yeah, it's going to be cool to run with a little bit, more help, I guess, outside help and just a cause to fuel it a little bit more. So that's the next thing. That's kind of just the only thing that I've seen just with the off season over the winter. But after that, in March, I'm planning on switching. I'm going to be balancing triathlons and probably ultra running, and then really decide what I want to get into. But I think I think every once in a while, you really just do have to go out there and just completely flatten yourself, just suffering. I think every once in a while that's healthy. A sprint triathlon, an Olympic triathlon, a fast time, that's always fun as well. But every once in a while, you just have to suffer.
And that could be the end of the podcast. Mic drop. It's not. I want to share a quote that I recently learned about from a client of mine. It's by Herman Melville. And he once said, "A man thinks that by mouthing hard words, he understands hard things." I'm just going to read it one more time. A man thinks that by mouthing hard words, he understands hard things. As much as I would love it if I could just talk about getting up early every single day, I could talk about going to the gym on a consistent basis, I can talk about doing the next hard thing, and I would understand what it actually means to suffer and to do those hard things. I mean, right, that would be too easy. But that's not how it works. And I think what you said so eloquently, sometimes you have to just go out there and flatten yourself. Sometimes you just have to go out there and suffer. Couldn't be more true, because we don't understand hard things until we are doing hard things. And I don't think people out there might be shaking their head like, yes, I've done hard things. Like, I understand what that's about. Like, I don't think we do. And I know for sure I don't, right? I am losing my sight. I've played athletics at a high level. I've done hard things, but there is a whole nother level of hard that I am very aware exists that I have not even touched. And then above that, there's a whole level of hard that I don't even know exists. I know it exists, but I can't even fathom what it is. And I think exactly what you're saying is what more people need to understand. It's like sometimes like some suffering is very needed and very healthy. So I don't know. Do you have anything to add to that thought, Danny?
Yeah. So a few things. I mean, I think number one, talking and acting are tied to your identity, right? So if you do want to be that person that appears to have done hard things, or you just want to, I guess, dramatize what you have done so far to make it seem like a lot more than it is, cool. Like, I mean, that can be you, right? You can be the talker. That's just not who you and I and others that we surround ourselves choose to be. That's just not enough for us, right? So you can be that. And I mean, I guess there's that, whatever, you can tie your identity to that. That's just not what I choose. I choose to explore that hard. Okay, how far can I push it, right? And then, like you said, there's other levels of suffering, and also beyond the suffering that you and I do and other endurance athletes, the suffering that people don't ask for, right? Whether with what James did, Operation Underground Railroad, human trafficking. I mean, that is suffering and that is enduring in ways that we really can't imagine. The cool thing is we can get a little bit of taste of it, a little taste of it through what we do, but that's suffering that we can't even touch. So yeah, and then I guess I lost my thought. What was the last thing that you said, Joe?
I think sometimes we just need a healthy dose of suffering. And, that was kind of the end of my thought process. But what you just said, I think is really important to understand. It's just, with social media, it can be really easy to go out and talk about things. And I find myself falling into the trap oftentimes. It's like, hey, I'm going to go out and do this, fast 10-mile run. I'm going to post about it on social media and, it's going to make me look cool and whatnot. Maybe I don't think about it in those exact words, but right, that's the idea. And I think sometimes myself and other people can get so caught up in like, how is this going to look to the outside world, that we don't actually fully embrace and experience the suffering or the actual hard thing that we're doing to its fullest capacity, because we're so concerned about what is this going to look like to the outside world? How is this going to make me look? What will other people think about this thing, that we lose track of like why we're actually doing it in the first place. And that's why I think it's so beautiful. A lot of the things that you do are for you first and foremost. And then if the world gets to see or taste a little bit of that along with you, that's great. But it's for you first and foremost. That suffering is yours.
Yeah. I think one of the coolest and one of the hardest things about having a platform is having a platform, right? Where you can say all of these things, but unfortunately then that's tied to a lot. Okay, how many people are reacting to it? How many people think that it's cool? What are people going to think of this, right? And it's so hard. Like as solid as I feel in my identity, it's really easy to get swayed and just see like, oh, this person's doing this, or oh, that didn't get the reaction that I hoped it would. So, man, that's one of the toughest things is I really hope to build a platform to impact people, and I just wanted to spread that love. But unfortunately, some of what comes back is just, what you have to deal with in social media. So one of the things that you can do is follow people that are like-minded, like yourself, and then you just build that hub of really just positive content.
Absolutely. And so to shift gears a little bit, but still in the same vein, I want to ask you a question about endurance. And so the question is simple. What does the word endurance mean to you?
So when I think of endurance, I kind of think that the opposite of it is survival. And that may not really make a lot of sense, but I kind of just think that if you're just surviving, you're just kind of making it to the next day, right? No, it doesn't really matter what condition you find yourself in as long as your heart's still beating. But I think endurance has a lot more intention, and you're really setting yourself up for what you know is going to be a long road, but a character building road that has intention behind it. So endurance and endurance sports, that it's going to be a 2.4-mile swim, 112-mile bike, 26.2 miles. And at some point during that, it's going to, no matter how fit you are, it's not going to depend on your physical strength. At some point, your mind is going to have to take over. So endurance to me is being able to shut off those voices, control your body, and get to the finish line.
I love it. The word that came to my mind when you said that was thriving, right? The opposite of survival is endurance, but endurance also involves thriving through things and moving with intention, not just merely doing it because it's there, not just bearing a burden, but really taking it with full intention and moving forward to where you want to be through that, using it as a vehicle. Now, the thing that's interesting about endurance sport is that there's a finish line, whether it's, rim to rim or it's a full distance triathlon or anything in between or further, there's a finish line. But in life, there's a finish line, but we don't know when that is. And I think that can make enduring hard things that happen to us a lot more challenging, because we don't know when that burden will be lifted, or if it'll ever be lifted, or if we'll ever get a chance to put our hands on our knees and rest and just take a minute to celebrate. And so you said in our last recorded conversation for the Pursuit podcast, something about a tombstone that really stuck with me. Do you remember what you said about the tombstone?
Yeah, I mean, maybe not word for word, but yeah, I mean, I just think and I picture a lot in my head that tombstone, right? Our whole life culminates into us being buried in the ground, maybe a nice funeral service. But what we have to say for ourselves is this tombstone, and there's a start date and there's an end date, and there's that dash in the middle, and that dash is our entire life story. And that's just insane to me, right? That just like that little dash, what is that dash going to say? When people look at that dash, what are they going to say? Oh, well, he went to work and that was cool, you know? And well, he didn't really pick any fights with anybody. So, you know, at least he was a good contributing citizen to society. Or, hey, this person went out and challenged themselves. They impacted me. They inspired me. They did all this. And unfortunately, that does focus a little bit on what other people are going to think. But unintentionally, when you're doing hard things and when you're pushing yourself, you're going to have that impact on people. So I still think it's important to think about.
Yeah. You know, endurance depends a lot on the direction, right? Where we're headed, and we can endure in that direction, but it's really defined by the impact, and the impact happens in the process. And I think to bring it back to a tangible example is, say somebody's running a race, say you're doing a marathon, right? The direction is set by the finish line, right? You know, you have to get from point A to point B, you know how long it is, and you can estimate how long it's going to take you to get there. But where you're really learning about yourself is when you're hurting, is when your lungs burn, your legs hurt, you don't want to take another step. That process is messy. It's ugly sometimes. It's hard. It's not going to be linear. You might have to stop and take a couple steps. You might have to put your hands on your knees and take a break, but you're going to keep moving forward. And it's in that process where you're impacted, where other people are impacted, and where the real magic happens. And so I think that's important for people to realize is, I think some of the biggest takeaways, the most growth, the biggest impact, and the most meaning all happen when things are messy, when they're hurting, when things aren't going the way that you want them to go. And it's really hard to realize that while it's happening. And I think we could always look back and say, oh, I made it through that. And now I understand that had to happen. I'm glad things worked out the way they worked out. But when we're in the middle of it, when we're in the thick of it, it's really hard to have joy and to be happy that we're hurting. And I'm curious for you, Danny, in any of your endurance events or just life in general, have you ever experienced a moment of just pure suffering that has also been maybe sadistically satisfying?
I think that kind of sums up everything. And it's funny because, oh man, where did I hear that? It might have even been there's a new documentary on Netflix called 14 Peaks. Insane. They're, you know, climbing Everest and then all the other 8,000-meter mountains out there in Asia. But he said, or I'm pretty sure it was there, but they just talk about how for some people, meditation is sitting in a very nice temperatured room in peace, mind quiet, and then that's where they find themselves. And for other people, meditation is when you are flattened out, like we've talked about, just completely suffering, completely miserable, and all of a sudden you just like rise to this other level of like meditation, and you just, I don't know, it's like you're almost connected with like something bigger, right? So something that comes to mind is when I think about doing these big things, it's sometimes your world can get so small. You go from one place, you go from your house to work, maybe from your house to church, your house to the grocery store, and all of a sudden your reality just becomes this 5-mile circle around you, and all of your problems seem so much bigger. The world seems completely against you. The news is all negative, and yeah, I mean, you can go completely insane. Like I really think that's where depression, anxiety, mental, just like all of these things that we're seeing nowadays, that's where it happens, and exponentiated by the pandemic, right? Because you have to be isolated, you have to be here. So to go out and just be completely humbled by one of the 7 wonders of the world, this ginormous thing where it's just like you can't help but just see the stars that are up there. You start at night, you end at night, you see the sun come up over these crazy red rocks, and eventually you realize I'm not that big of a deal, right? This world could take me out of here in 2 seconds if it wanted to. And all of a sudden you just get that dose of reality, where that like meditative state, right? Where all of a sudden that suffering is satisfying, because it just like completely changes your world, and you're like, okay, it's like a reset button, right? Where all of a sudden you come back to work and you're like, oh, this person sent me a very rude email. Cool. Like there's bigger things out there in the world. So yeah.
Yeah, it puts things in perspective. And it's just, for anybody who maybe can't relate to that example that you gave of being able to see the stars and the sunrise over the Grand Canyon, think about, the last time you stubbed your toe on a coffee table, right? It brings you to this present moment where you are hyper focused on one thing, and that's what you're feeling. It's the pain. And I think that in a different way, various endurance endeavors can elicit the same thing where you are almost one with the pain that you're feeling in a way that becomes satisfying because it just brings you to this elevated level of consciousness and awareness and presence. And you're so right. I mean, life is so much bigger than us. And it's funny, in high school, I started a club called Life's Not Fair. And I probably could have done a better job with the branding, but the tagline, the whole tagline was life's not fair, but it could always be worse. So essentially, whatever it is that you're struggling with, whatever it is that is hard for you, right? It could always be worse. So instead of complaining, let's go out, let's come together, and let's help the people who really have it bad. And that was the whole concept. And I think it worked for me at the time, and it was able to help some people in my community because it was bigger than any one person. And we realized that life is bigger than us. And sometimes it takes a really catastrophic event. It takes a traumatizing event, something really horrific sometimes for people to realize that life is so much more important than the day-to-day problems of my phone is acting up, or I didn't get this thing that I wanted, or my job is not exactly how I wish it was. And I think it just is all a matter of perspective. So I appreciate you sharing that, Danny. And to kind of start to wrap things up here, I want to get into the final question. And now this question I've been asking with different wording throughout the previous 10 podcast episodes. And what I really want to do is frame this in a way that's going to be impactful for the listener. And so if you're listening to this podcast, this question is for you. And so, Danny, if someone is listening on the other end of this podcast and they are in a tough spot, they're really struggling with something, they're facing adversity that they just don't know where to go. What words, what advice, what encouragement would you have for that specific person on the other end of the microphone?
Yeah. So for 99% of the situations probably that are out there, in the most loving way that I can possibly say this, it's not that big of a deal, right? With our whole conversation that we've had today, and I really want to put that in perspective because I don't want it to come off as mean, but you realize how much out there in the world you have control over and how little this moment means, right? And I say 99% of the people out there because there are some serious situations, right, where you can really be suffering. It can be a life-altering thing, but for 99% of the time, yeah, it's not that big of a deal. So life's not fair, but it could always be worse, right, Joe? And the biggest advice that I would give is go back to the basics. Go back to your identity, or find your identity. Figure out what's important to you. Figure out what you want to accomplish in the next whatever time frame, 1 month, 6 months, year, and then obsessively pursue that. Because the more that you're pursuing something, the less you're going to be worried about yourself. And then all of a sudden you look back 3 months and it's just been this healing process where you've been able to dedicate yourself to something, find your identity, and then your problem all of a sudden is in the rear view mirror. And I can only say that from personal experience because that's what I shared today. I really had to decide, okay, who was I as a person? What am I going to pursue? Make that year plan. And now I look back a year later and I've been surrounded by these incredible groups, people, whereas previously I had no friends as a new person here in Utah. And now I have this group of people that's pushing me, much older and wiser than me for a lot of them. And now I have this insane community only because I had those goals and I pursued them as hard as I could.
Absolutely love it, man. Absolutely love it. And I want to speak for Danny on his behalf for a second. But if anybody out there listening really resonated with anything that Danny had to say, I would just encourage you to please reach out to him, because I know from firsthand experience, Danny is the type of person that wants to help anybody who needs help and wants to connect with people who are also pursuing hard things. Even if you're not there yet, even if you're still in just the contemplation phase and you need somebody to push you a little bit, Danny's the guy. And so Danny, if somebody wanted to connect with you, if somebody wanted to follow along with your journey and all the crazy stuff you have going on, where's the best place for them to do that?
Best place would be Instagram for sure. That's really my main social media. I've decided to steer away from coaching in all aspects. So really, for somebody to come to me, I just love to have conversations, give my outside perspective, because that's what I've just found most valuable. And so yeah, if anybody wants to reach out to me and just get an outside perspective, talk a little bit more, Instagram, just my name, Danny Jimenez, but the I in my name is a 1. And then if you want to support my brand as well, it's just the gocrazybrand.com. Got some shirts on there and some stickers and some other stuff coming. But Instagram's definitely the best place to reach me, and then we can connect, get phone numbers and stuff like that.
Awesome. Now, this is a little off topic, but I have to ask, is the 1 in your Instagram handle because the I wasn't available, or because it represents something?
The I was not available, and I was number 1 my sophomore year of high school. So I was just, all right, put that on there. I thought I was pretty clever.
There you go. Yeah. See, I have Joe A. Rinaldi because my middle name is Anthony, but more importantly, because someone has Joe Rinaldi. So Joe, if you're listening to this podcast by some chance, I've tried to buy it off you in the past, and I will continue to persist. So just reach out. But anyway, Danny, thank you so much for your time, man. I always enjoy our conversations. I know this one's going to reach a lot of people who need it, and just appreciate you. Thank you again.
Absolutely. I love our conversations. I feel like it always gives me an extra boost, and I'm needing it. So I appreciate it, John.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Project Indoor podcast, go ahead and subscribe, leave a review on your platform of choice, and share this episode with a friend. It helps us get more conversations like this out to more people like you. We appreciate you, and we'll talk to you next time. Oh, and one more thing. If you're looking for a community of people all striving to be better together, check out the Project Indoor Hard Things Club. The link is in the description below. We'd love to have you.